2014, a taxi driver named Lanre Adeku vanished in the Nigerian wilderness. A few hours later, one of his friends received this text message. "They're keeping me in an underground lair in Soka Forest. Please help me. People are dying all around me." The police followed Adeku's trail, and what they found inside Soka Forest were scenes straight out of a nightmare. Lanre Adeku was driving two passengers around the outskirts of Soka Forest, one of the wooded areas on the edge of the city of Ibadan, Nigeria. He'd heard rumors about this place, whispers of strange activity and missing people. Lured by a bizarre sight, Adeku stepped off his motorcycle. Then his passengers watched in horror as something dragged Adeku into the dense forestry. The cab driver was never seen again, but his disappearance led police to a very disturbing discovery. Ibadan is the capital and most populous city of Oyo State, Nigeria. It sits around 100 miles from the Atlantic coast, and today has plenty of modern attractions like zoos, nightclubs, and restaurants. On the outskirts of the city lies the rural zones, including miles and miles of farmland and forestry. In the evening of March 14th, 2014, a motorcycle taxi driver named Lanre Adeku was taking two passengers around the outskirts of Soka Forest, one of the wooded areas on the edge of the city. The driver had to be as cautious as possible, because over the past few years, rumors of people going missing in this area were rife, not just to drivers, but to people from all walks of life. Different ages and genders simply vanished from the earth, while police did very little to find them. Ibadan had a reputation for being a corrupt place, so if the police didn't investigate a missing person report, no one forced them to explain why. Adeku arrived at a very strange scene. On the edge of the forest was a row of burnt-out cars. Adeku stopped to inspect, and almost like he'd been lured, a seemingly invisible force dragged Adeku into the forest. His two passengers quickly fled the scene and headed back towards the city, where they informed the police and Adeku's taxi company what happened. The police weren't in a rush to investigate, but a few hours later, one of Adeku's friends received a very disturbing text message. "I've been kidnapped. They're keeping me in an underground lair in Soka Forest with 8 other people. Please help me. People are dying all around me." Adeku's friend sprang into action. He gathered around 40 locals and headed to the location Adeku gave him. They followed his directions by text message, first discovering Adeku's motorcycle lying in a river. They then saw the same burnt-out vehicles Adeku did, but they also spotted piles of clothes and human hair. Suddenly, a deafening gunshot pierced the air, sending the search party scattering in fear. Someone inside the forest didn't want them intruding, but this didn't stop the locals from persevering. They recruited more. Somewhere to the tune of 100 volunteers made their way into the depths of Soka Forest. They waded through thick clusters of trees and dirt paths until the forest opened into an extensive grassy area, and that was when they discovered the strange urban settlement inside this vast forestry. They noticed decrepit buildings crowned with barbed wire. Outside the first, a small black building, were piles of shoes and religious relics designed to warn people of imminent danger. The volunteers, finding courage in numbers, broke down the barbed wire fence to the building and invaded. They expected the worst, but what they found went beyond anything they could have imagined. There were no killers inside, only victims. Endless, countless victims subject to inhumane terror that betrayed all morality and conscience. If you're enjoying our content and want to see 2 new videos a week, please consider liking the video, subscribing, and letting us know in the comments what you want our next video to feature. It was like the volunteers had unknowingly wandered into the devil's playground. They found what they described as a torture chamber, keeping alive victims in place with thick chains and fetters. 18 males and 5 females were nothing but skin and bones, laying on cold butcher's slabs. Some weren't chained at all, but were so weak they just lay in a catatonic state on the ground. There was a makeshift guillotine oozing with fresh blood. The smell inside was repugnant and bile-inducing. Just outside, Not far from the living victims, they found meat flies feasting on the remains of 20 decomposing corpses. Bones, body parts, and decapitated heads have been scattered to the bushes. Human skulls, dismembered limbs, some full corpses lay in shallow graves. There were even boxes of passports, clothes, jewelry, and children's toys, suggesting that the true horrors went far beyond what they could see on the surface. But sadly, there was no sign of Adeku. The volunteers called the police, the sheer number of calls prompting them to actually respond to the request. The macabre details quickly reached the locals, and soon, the Soka Forest was heaving with onlookers. Some came to find their lost loved ones. Others came to provide food and medical assistance. And some came just to witness the gruesome spectacle for themselves. When police asked one of the surviving victims exactly what went on here, she mumbled a few incoherent words and then collapsed. A witness later claimed, "No description is too much to express the horrors. Here, life is hellish, brutish, loudish, and nasty. It's distasteful and barbaric. It's better read and heard than seen. If you go there once, you could find it difficult to eat your next meal." As police teams scoured the forest, they made more horrific discoveries. They found a blood-soaked scrotum and intestines laying in a pile with flies swarming over them. The amount of clothing and personal items scattered everywhere indicated that those who were captured and killed were numbered in the hundreds. One particularly disturbing discovery was a small pen with a live crocodile inside, suggesting that some victims may have ended up inside the beast's stomach. Authorities believed that the killings occurred in that place for many years. A former resident of the area later said that around 3 years earlier, people began hearing noises in the forest during the night hours. They would hear people calling for help and screaming. They said the brush was so thick, no one could see what was going on inside. And any concerns they had, they took to the police. The police repeatedly told them there was nothing to fear, so they stopped reporting their concerns. Another resident came forward saying that there was a man who would drive a black Jeep into the forest every night. He would come around 8 p.m. and walk along the riverbank and into the forest. He had been seen many times coming and going, and when he was questioned, he would just tell people he was going for a spiritual bath in the river. He would then return to his vehicle around 90 minutes later and do the same thing the next evening. Who this mysterious figure was remains unknown. The police's initial theory was that the torture chamber inside the forest was a farm for organ harvesting. Whether it was a group operation or the handiwork of a lone perpetrator is still a mystery. The black market for body parts is a booming trade in Nigeria. Even in the modern age, incidents of so-called ritual killings occur at an alarming rate, despite many people believing that such barbaric acts like it no longer exist. Strangely, as communities in Nigeria become more reliant on religion, ritual killings are increasing as the quest for power pervades society. As a country that's trying to keep up with more developed countries, many people in Nigeria are still stuck in the belief that human blood and body parts are the shortest route to wealth, safety, and protection. Killers search for human parts at the request of herbalists, who require them to make sacrifices or make magical potions to provide wealth and power. Some people engage in ritual killings to obtain charms that they believe will make them invincible, or protect them or their business from failure, illness, accidents, or spiritual attacks. It took several months to nurse the living victims back to health. Some of them appear to be ridden with mental illness, possibly brought up on the cruelty they endured in the forest. When police questioned them, most of them spoke about being kidnapped while going about their daily lives, then passing out and waking up inside the torture den. Some victims said they'd been chained up for months and given feedings once a week. When asked who exactly abducted them, or if they'd seen anyone actually partake in killings inside the torture chambers, no one could give a definitive answer. But one perpetrator soon became known to authorities, a local organ hunter named Shodeep. Although Shodeep denied any involvement with the forest horrors, he explained to police that he had partaken in similar atrocities in the past. According to Shodeep, he had been hired by an anonymous shaman known as Adeku. Shodeep told authorities, "Anytime I wanted to go for killing, Adeku would give me some charms and also teach me some incantations to recite, so that nobody would see me at the scene of the crime. I would hit the victim with a shovel and recite the incantation immediately when I saw blood coming out of the victim's body. Adeku said the spirits of the victims would come to him after I had killed them. Adeku did not tell me the reason for the killings, but he would pay me after each killing I carried out for him. Sodeep's claims, despite their disturbing nature, were written off by authorities as just another ritual killing spree in a country where such horrors are rampant. Sodeep, the confessed organ harvester, was eventually cleared of any suspicion in the Soka Forest murders and was not apprehended for his past actions. The mystery continues. The discovery of the Soka Forest horrors created great anxiety in the residents of Ibadan. It caused civil unrest between residents and police, resulting in many protests, riots, and terrifyingly, 2 public executions. Unsatisfied with the police's lack of competence around the case, locals took the law into their own hands and began investigating things themselves. They found a local man acting deranged in an area near the forest. He had a gun, as well as items of clothing that clearly didn't belong to him. In his jacket, they found the SIM cards from 40 different phones. More concerning, however, was that the man also had 4 human tongues in his possession. Angry locals lynched the man on the outskirts of the Soka Forest, setting him on fire while he was still alive. Another similar incident played out at the end of 2014, with furious locals beating another sketchy gentleman to death. The general feeling amongst the locals was that anyone who acted strangely might be associated with the carnage inside the Soka Forest. Even years after the first discovery of the slaughters inside, this anxiety is still prevalent amongst the residents of Ibadan. Some believe there are even more horrors yet to be discovered beneath the abandoned buildings inside Soka, and they continually push police to investigate further. Since 2014, the area where the evils were found has been off limits to the public. The buildings have since been demolished, and there are plans to build schools where the torture den once stood. But even with this optimistic outlook for the future, the words Soka Forest still invoke feelings of dread and unease in the residents. No official answers. Exactly what happened inside this forest of horrors, or its reason for existing, remains a mystery to this day. Researchers are convinced that it's somehow linked to cannibalism, ritual murder, or occult practices, but the whole truth is yet to be uncovered. Was this the site of a death cult engaging in ritual sacrifice? Was this the lair of a lone serial killer taking advantage of the forest solitude? Could it be some kind of human farm where body parts and internal organs were removed and sold to the highest bidder? Whatever the truth might be, it's unlikely we'll have an answer anytime soon. If you're enjoying our content and want to see 2 new videos a week, please consider liking the video, subscribing, and letting us know in the comments what you want our next video to feature.